Have you ever been asked to move, not because you were wrong, but because someone decided you didn't belong? Imagine sitting in a first-class seat you earned, ticket in hand, heart at peace, until a flight attendant leans down and says there's been a system glitch. But the real glitch isn't in the system. It's in the way the world still measures worth by the color of a person's skin. Now imagine you're 70 years old, full of grace and history. And in that moment, you must choose stay silent to keep the peace, or stand tall to protect your dignity. What would you do? Would you give up your seat to avoid the scene, or hold your ground, knowing your calm could change everything? This is the story of Elaine Porter, a woman who refused to surrender her dignity, and the son whose single phone call shook an empire. A story not about revenge, but about grace powerful enough to demand justice. If you believe respect is earned through courage, not status, stay with us. And before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support stories that remind us who we are when the world tests our humanity. The terminal lights at JFK shimmered like an endless constellation. Beneath them, Elaine Porter adjusted the strap of her worn brown leather bag, the same one she'd carried since her nursing days at St. Mary's Community Hospital. The leather had softened over the years, creased with memory and patience, much like the woman herself. She had arrived early, as she always did. 70 years had taught her that rushing never made a journey smoother. A few travelers glanced at her as they rolled sleek luggage past. Some smiled politely. Most looked through her. Elaine didn't mind. She'd spent her life in the background tending to others, never demanding a spotlight. Today, however, was different. It was her first time flying first class. Her son, Malcolm Porter, had insisted, "Ma, you've worked your whole life. You deserve to see the world in comfort for once," he'd said, his voice carrying that firm tenderness she had raised him with. Malcolm, now the CEO of Arcturus Systems, one of the biggest transport tech firms in the country, had built an empire of quiet brilliance. To Elaine, though, he was still the boy who used to sneak into her hospital ward with peanut butter sandwiches when she worked double shifts. She smiled at the memory, sipping her tea in the VIP lounge. The place smelled of citrus and new carpet sterile luxury. A soft jazz tune played in the background. Screens flashed flight numbers and destinations. A white woman in a pearl blazer and glossy heels passed by, dragging a designer suitcase. She glanced at Elaine, then quickly away, as if uncertain whether the elderly black woman belonged in this lounge at all. Elaine noticed. Of course, she always noticed, but she chose peace. She always did. Elaine's phone buzzed. "Malcolm, you at the airport yet?" She smiled and typed back slowly, the way mothers do when they want to prolong the moment. "Elaine, already waiting. They gave me hot tea, real fancy. Malcolm, good. You're in seat 1A, front row. You'll be comfortable." Elaine, front row. Mercy, that's too much. Malcolm, ma, it's your time to rest. Enjoy it. She could almost hear his grin through the phone. Elaine leaned back and closed her eyes. The murmur of travelers faded into a soft hum. For the first time in months, she felt something like lightness, the kind she used to feel on spring mornings after long night shifts, when she'd watch the sunrise before heading home to Malcolm's sleepy smile. Life had been hard, yes, but she had never called it unfair. When her husband, Charles, died of a heart attack at 43, Elaine was left with a 12-year-old boy, a mortgage, and a nursing job that barely paid enough to keep the lights on. She remembered crying only once quietly, in the laundry room, then getting up and going back to work. Now, decades later, she was here, Going to London to see the Chelsea Flower Show. Her lifelong dream. Her son had arranged everything, flight, hotels, even a chauffeur. She touched the silver cross pendant on her neck and whispered, "Thank you, Lord." As the boarding announcement echoed through the lounge, Aurora Airlines Flight 452 to London Heathrow. Now boarding first-class passengers. Elaine gathered her things. The brown leather bag squeaked softly as she slung it over her shoulder. She moved slowly but gracefully, her steps steady, her back straight. The gate was bright and crowded. A young attendant smiled half-heartedly while checking passports. Behind her stood a tall blonde woman, speaking into her phone. "Yes, I'm in 1A. Tell Edward to have the driver waiting." "I don't like delays," she said, her voice slicing through the air. Elaine blinked. 1A. She smiled politely, assuming coincidence. When it was her turn, Elaine handed over her passport and boarding pass. The attendant scanned it, frowned, then forced a smile. "Mrs. Porter, everything looks good. Please proceed." Elaine thanked her softly and moved toward the jet bridge. Behind her, the blonde woman Victoria Langford handed her own boarding pass with a confident flick. The same seat number glowed on the screen. The attendant's smile faltered. Inside the aircraft, the first-class cabin gleamed in ivory and chrome. Plush seats, glass partitions, hushed tones. A flight attendant in perfect red lipstick, Cassandra Wells, greeted Elaine with the kind of smile trained for photographs, not people. "Welcome aboard. Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass?" Elaine handed it over, still smiling. Cassandra looked at the screen, blinked, then glanced up. "Oh, there must be some kind of mix-up." She turned toward the purser, Ethan Brooks, a man in his 50s with silver hair and a nervous expression. They whispered briefly. Elaine waited, patient as ever. Finally, Cassandra returned, still smiling, tighter this time. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Porter, but it seems there's been a system glitch. Seat 1A might have been double-booked." Elaine tilted her head gently. "Oh, that's strange. My son booked it weeks ago." "Yes, I understand," Cassandra said, voice brittle with courtesy. "We just need to sort it out. Perhaps you could wait in 4C until we clarify." Elaine's fingers tightened on her bag. She stayed calm. "I'll wait here until you do. This is the seat on my ticket." Ethan approached, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, if you could cooperate, we'd appreciate it. We don't want to delay the flight." That word cooperate landed heavy. Elaine looked around. A few passengers were watching now, pretending not to. The hum of the cabin felt sharper, colder, and then Victoria Langford appeared, perfume preceding her. She glanced at Elaine, then at the seat. "Oh, that's my seat," she said lightly, the way one might claim a coat left on a chair. Cassandra hurried to her side. "Yes, Miss Langford, there's been a small mix-up. We're fixing it." Elaine's lips pressed together. "No one needs fixing, just honesty." Victoria smiled thinly. "I'm sure it's just a technical thing. Dear, sometimes the system gets confused." Elaine met her eyes calm, unflinching. "I'm not confused." Silence. Even the hum of the engine seemed to pause. Ethan cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if you don't mind stepping aside, we can resolve this quickly." Elaine's voice softened, but her spine stayed straight. "I do mind, because stepping aside is exactly what you expect me to do." Cassandra's tone sharpened. "Mrs. Porter, please understand, we're just trying to make this easier for everyone." Elaine smiled, weary but kind. Easier for whom a few passengers looked down at their phones. One woman shifted uncomfortably. Victoria folded her arms. Can we just move on? I have meetings waiting in London. Cassandra gestured to Ethan again. He approached Elaine, low voice trembling with frustration. If you keep refusing, we'll have to involve the captain. Elaine inhaled deeply. She remembered nights when angry families screamed at her in the ER, when patients coded and she held their hands through the final breath. Compared to that, this moment was nothing. Still, her heart hurt not from fear, but from a deep, familiar exhaustion. She nodded slowly. Call him. Then Ethan blinked. Ma'am, call your captain. Let's do this right. He hesitated, then walked away. Elaine sat down in 1A, quietly folding her hands. The cabin felt like glass all eyes. No warmth. Her phone buzzed again. Malcolm? She stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Hey, Ma, you boarding yet? Her voice was steady, gentle as always. Yes, baby. I'm here, but they're saying there's a problem with my seat. Pause. Then silence. Stay right there, Malcolm said. His voice dropped an octave. Don't move. Elaine's gaze drifted to the window. Outside, the afternoon sun glowed against the tarmac. Planes rolled by, one after another, free and untouchable. Inside, she felt small but not powerless. Her fingers brushed the pendant again, and she whispered, Lord, if this is another test, give me grace, not anger. Cassandra approached once more, phone pressed to her ear, eyes wide with confusion. Something had changed in her posture, nervous now, unsure. The captain's voice came over the intercom, low and firm. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll have a brief delay before departure. Thank you for your patience. Elaine closed her eyes. She didn't know what her son was doing, but she knew this much when Malcolm spoke. People listened, and somewhere high above the terminal, the first ripple of consequences had already begun. The hum of the cabin deepened. A subtle wave of unease drifted through first class as the delay stretched into minutes. Passengers glanced at their watches, exchanged polite sighs, and returned to their screens. Only Elaine Porter sat still, her hands folded neatly over her handbag, eyes calm but far away. Across the aisle, Victoria Langford was losing patience. Her diamond bracelet flashed as she scrolled her phone with sharp, irritated gestures. This is ridiculous, she muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. I've been flying with Aurora for 20 years, and I've never seen such incompetence. Cassandra Wells approached with a strained smile. Ms. Langford, please bear with us. We're just confirming something with the gate. I don't care who you confirm it with, Victoria said, tapping her heel. That seat is mine. She can't possibly. She tilted her head toward Elaine afford a ticket like that. The words fell like broken glass. A few passengers looked up. One man coughed, pretending to clear his throat. Elaine didn't flinch. She'd heard worse, from patients, supervisors, strangers who thought kindness was weakness. She simply breathed in, slow and steady. Her gaze fixed out the window, where a service truck moved lazily across the tarmac. Cassandra's radio buzzed softly. She turned away, listening, nodding quickly. Yes, understood. Then she turned back with a frozen grin. Mrs. Porter, we're still seeing a duplicate record for your seat. Could I ask where you purchased your ticket? My son booked it, Elaine said evenly. Weeks ago. Of course, Cassandra replied, tone sugar-coated. And your son's name Malcolm Porter, the purser. Ethan Brooks, who'd been standing behind her, went still. His eyes flicked up, The name was familiar somehow, though he couldn't place it. Cassandra didn't notice. She was too busy trying to sound authoritative. "Well," she said after a beat, "we'll sort this out shortly. For now, maybe we can seat you temporarily in row 4 until the issue is corrected." Elaine's answer was simple. No, it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The quiet firmness in that single word filled the space more powerfully than anger ever could. Ma'am, Elaine shook her head gently. "If the airline made a mistake, then the airline can fix it. But this is my seat." Victoria scoffed. "Oh, for heaven's sake, just let her have it. Give her the seat if she wants it so badly." Cassandra's cheeks reddened. "Ms. Langford, please." But Victoria was enjoying herself now. "No, really. Let her sit there if it makes her feel important. I'll take another flight." Elaine turned then, meeting her eyes, voice calm as steady rain. "Importance isn't what I'm after. Respect is." The cabin went silent again. Cassandra felt her pulse thudding. She needed this situation to end. Fast. She gestured sharply to Ethan. "Call the gate. I want confirmation right now." Ethan hesitated, lowering his voice. "Maybe we should just let her." "Call the gate," Cassandra repeated, her tone brittle. He obeyed, walking briskly down the aisle, disappearing through the curtain. Cassandra leaned closer to Elaine, smile fixed. "Please, Mrs. Porter, if you could cooperate, we can resolve this faster." That word again. Cooperate. Elaine blinked slowly, her patience thinning but intact. "I'm not refusing to cooperate. I'm refusing to surrender what's rightfully mine." Cassandra straightened. "You're holding up boarding. We have a schedule. And I have dignity," Elaine said softly. "Maybe we both have something to keep." For a fleeting second, Cassandra's mask slipped. Something flickered behind her eyes, guilt, maybe, or shame, but she buried it quickly. A young woman's voice came from behind. Excuse me?" Everyone turned. It was Paula Nguyen, the gate agent. She looked barely 25, hair tucked under a navy cap that seemed too big for her. Her eyes darted nervously between Cassandra and Elaine. "Sorry," she stammered. "I just got off the phone with corporate. There's, a situation." Cassandra stiffened. "What kind of situation?" Paula swallowed. "They said the passenger in seat 1A is to remain seated. Under no circumstances should she be moved." "Who said that?" Cassandra demanded. Paula hesitated. "The operations manager said the CEO's office called directly." A hush fell. Cassandra blinked. "The CEO's office of Aurora Airlines." Paula shook her head slowly. "No, ma'am. Arcturus Systems." The color drained from Cassandra's face. Ethan returned just in time to hear it. "What's going on?" Cassandra ignored him, her mind spinning. Arcturus Systems, the tech giant that managed Aurora's entire logistics network, the one that could cripple operations with a single email. She turned toward Elaine, finally understanding. "Mrs." Porter sat perfectly still, hands folded, eyes gentle but unyielding. Cassandra swallowed. "Ma'am, is your son—" Elaine looked at her, tone mild. "My son is Malcolm Porter." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the faint hum of the engine seemed to fade. Cassandra took a step back. "Excuse me just a moment." Her voice cracked slightly. She hurried toward the cockpit, whispering frantically into her radio. Ethan stood frozen beside Victoria, who was staring, mouth slightly open. Elaine turned back to the window. The sunlight had shifted, turning the glass into a sheet of gold. For the first time since boarding, she allowed herself a small, private smile. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds was already on a call with ground control. His tone was calm but edged with tension. "You're telling me we have a passenger linked to a suspended corporate account?" "Yes, Captain," came the response. "Aurora's board just received notice from Arcturus Systems. All business class travel contracts are frozen pending investigation. They want a report on an incident involving a passenger named Elaine Porter." The captain closed his eyes briefly. Understood. When he stepped out into the cabin a few minutes later, his posture had changed. He wasn't just a pilot now. He was a man walking into a storm he hadn't seen coming. He approached Elaine's seat, removing his cap. "Mrs. Porter." She looked up politely. "My name is Captain Reynolds. I'd like to personally apologize for the misunderstanding. It appears there's been a serious error on our end." Elaine tilted her head slightly. "Error's a kind word." He nodded, shame coloring his voice. "You're right. I'm sorry, ma'am." Victoria tried to interject, but my reservation. The captain turned sharply. "Miss Langford, this discussion is over." Her jaw dropped. "Excuse me." He faced her fully. "You may either take another seat or deboard. Those are your options." Victoria's eyes widened in disbelief. She looked around, waiting for someone to defend her. No one did. Cassandra stood near the galley, pale as paper. Ethan stared at the floor. After a long, tight pause, Victoria grabbed her purse and stormed past the curtain, muttering curses under her breath. The captain turned back to Elaine. "Ma'am, you are welcome to remain in 1A. We'll depart as soon as the ground team clears us." Elaine studied his face. He meant the apology. She could see it in his eyes. But something inside her had already shifted. The humiliation lingered, sour and heavy, like smoke after a fire. She took a slow breath, then spoke gently. "Captain, I appreciate your apology. Truly. But I won't be flying today." He blinked. "Ma'am, I'll make other arrangements. Mrs. Porter, please." She raised a hand. "No hard feelings. I just need some air." The captain didn't argue. He only nodded, stepping aside as Elaine rose. Passengers watched silently as she picked up her bag, smoothing her jacket. Her movements were graceful, deliberate, the poise of someone who knew she didn't have to prove anything. She walked down the aisle, each step echoing like a heartbeat. Cassandra tried to speak but couldn't find the words. At the cabin door, Elaine paused. "Captain," she said softly. "Yes, ma'am. Teach your crew that kindness costs less than pride." And then she was gone. Outside the jet bridge, the air felt cooler, clearer. Paula followed at a distance, unsure if she should say something. "Mrs. Porter," she called hesitantly. Elaine turned. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I should have spoken up sooner." Elaine smiled, weary but kind. "You're young. Learn from it, and you'll do fine." Paula nodded, tears welling. As Elaine walked away, her phone vibrated again. Malcolm's voice was calm, controlled. "Ma, are you all right?" "I'm fine, baby," she said. "Don't you worry about me." "Too late," he replied quietly. "They'll learn what accountability feels like." Malcolm, but he'd already hung up. Elaine sighed, slipping the phone into her purse. She didn't know exactly what her son intended, but she knew this. He'd always been his mother's son, patient until pushed too far. She glanced back at the plane through the terminal window. The captain stood by the door, watching her go. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken exchange of respect. Then she turned and walked toward the exit, her figure small but unbroken against the vast white light of the concourse. Somewhere behind her, the captain's voice came over the intercom again, firmer this time. Ladies and gentlemen, this flight will remain grounded until further notice. Passengers murmured in confusion, but for Elaine, the sound faded in the distance. She was already free. The skyline of Manhattan shimmered through the glass walls of Arcturus Tower, 80 floors above the city. The morning light painted everything in muted gold, and yet the conference room felt cold, clinical. Rows of executives sat around a glass table as numbers glowed on the giant wall screen quarterly projections, global expansions, shareholder returns. At the head of the table sat Malcolm Porter, shoulders squared, eyes steady. He had the kind of composure that didn't need to raise its voice to command a room. A single word from him could move millions of dollars. But that morning, he wasn't listening. Not really. His mind was elsewhere, a restlessness beneath his calm exterior. When his phone vibrated quietly on the table, he almost ignored it. Then he saw the caller ID. Ma. He didn't hesitate. "Excuse me," he said, rising from his chair before anyone could respond. The room fell silent as the CEO of Arcturus Systems stepped out, his phone pressed to his ear. "Hey, Ma," he said softly, smiling unconsciously. "You bored yet?" There was a pause, long enough for the silence to become heavy. Then his mother's voice came through, calm but strained. "They said there's a problem with my seat. Baby, something about a system error." He froze mid-step. "A problem." "Yes. They want me to move for someone else." He stopped walking. The hum of the city below seemed to fade until all he could hear was her voice, polite, patient, the same tone she used when she didn't want him to worry. But he heard the fatigue behind it, the quiet humiliation. He closed his eyes, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "Stay right there. Ma, don't move an inch. But Malcolm, please. Ma, just stay seated." He hung up gently, then stood for a long moment in silence. His reflection in the glass looked almost like another man, one fighting to contain the storm rising behind his eyes. He turned sharply and re-entered the conference room. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. "Denise," he said, addressing Denise Hartman, his COO and oldest ally. "Pause all discussions. I need you to call Aurora Airlines executive office immediately." Her eyebrows lifted. "What's happened?" He took a deep breath, voice measured but low. "They've just harassed my mother on one of their flights. First class, seat 1A. Denise blinked. "Processing. Aurora Airlines. That's our primary travel partner." He finished, "Effective immediately. Suspend all corporate bookings, travel accounts, and vendor payments connected to them." One of the board members leaned forward nervously. "Malcolm, that's a $60 million account." He met the man's eyes, steady and unflinching. "Then it's $60 million they can afford to lose for disrespecting the wrong woman." Denise hesitated. "Do you want me to verify what happened first?" His voice softened, but carried an iron edge. "Denise, I don't need verification when it's my mother. Make the call." She nodded once, already dialing. Malcolm walked to the window, the city stretching endlessly below. He could see everything, glass towers, yellow taxis, the Hudson glinting in the distance. The view was breathtaking, but at that moment, it felt suffocating. He remembered another view, a cramped hospital hallway, fluorescent lights, the sound of his mother's shoes squeaking on the linoleum as she rushed to save lives. The same woman who'd worked through double shifts to buy him textbooks, who never complained even when her back ached, who believed that dignity was a choice, not a privilege. And now someone had looked at her and decided she didn't belong in a seat she'd earned. His fingers curled into a fist. Across the table, Denise spoke quietly into her phone. "This is Denise Hartman." CO at Arcturus Systems. I'm calling regarding Flight 452. Yes, Mrs. Elaine Porter. We've received word of discriminatory treatment by your crew. I need to speak to your VP of Corporate Accounts right now. Her expression hardened as she listened. Then find him, because this is about to become very public. She hung up and looked at Malcolm. They're scrambling. The moment they heard your name, the call went straight up the chain. Malcolm didn't smile. Good. Let them scramble. He turned toward his assistant. Get me the direct line to Aurora's CEO, Thomas Greer. The assistant hesitated. Should I tell him what it's about? He'll know soon enough, Malcolm said. He stepped into his private office, closing the door behind him. The hum of electronics filled the silence computers, screens, the faint pulse of servers from the floor below. He picked up the phone and dialed. It rang twice before connecting. Thomas Greer, came the voice. Smooth. Practiced. Thomas, it's Malcolm Porter. A pause. Malcolm, always good to hear from you. What can I do for you? Can start, Malcolm interrupted quietly. By explaining why your staff just tried to remove my 70-year-old mother from a seat she paid for. Greer hesitated. What I'm sure, this is a misunderstanding. It's not, Malcolm said, voice even, almost gentle. But there was a gravity beneath it that made the other man falter. They called her uncooperative, pressured her to move. For a white passenger. Malcolm, please, let us investigate. I don't want an investigation, Malcolm said. I want accountability. There was silence on the line. Then Malcolm continued, his tone colder. Effective immediately. Arcturus Systems is freezing all contracts with Aurora Airlines. Travel, tech, and logistics. My team will send confirmation within the hour. Greer's voice rose in alarm. Malcolm, that's an overreaction. We've partnered for 7 years. 7 years, Malcolm repeated. And today your people reminded my mother that partnership doesn't always mean equality. He paused, his voice softening, almost reflective. She spent her life serving others, Thomas, healing people who couldn't pay, and your crew made her feel small. So yes, it's overreaction if you see this as business. But to me, it's personal. Greer exhaled heavily. Let me fix this. I'll call the captain myself. You'll do more than that, Malcolm said. You'll issue a formal apology, not a statement, a confession. You'll fire the crew involved and mandate company-wide training on bias and accountability. And you'll make sure the world knows you're doing it. Greer was silent for a long moment. If I agree to that, will you reconsider? Malcolm looked out at the skyline again. I'll reconsider when I see you mean it. He ended the call. Denise entered quietly a few minutes later. The news is spreading, she said. One of the passengers recorded the incident. It's already on social media. Malcolm turned from the window. Show me. She handed him a tablet. The video was shaky, filmed from a nearby seat. Elaine sitting quietly in 1A. Cassandra leaning over her, voice clipped and patronizing. Victoria's complaint echoing, the word cooperate ringing through the cabin. Then Elaine's calm voice, I'm not confused. The clip ended with her serene face as the camera panned away. Within 2 hours, it had 500,000 views. By the end of the afternoon, it would have 10 million. Malcolm watched in silence. His throat tightened, a mix of pride and sorrow. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't lost her grace. She didn't need to. He closed the tablet slowly. Denise, draft a statement. Short, factual, firm. What should it say that Arcturus Systems stands against discrimination in any form, and that we expect the same of our partners? Effective immediately. Aurora Airlines contracts are suspended pending reform. Denise nodded. You want to review it before we release? No, he said. I trust your judgment. She hesitated at the door. Malcolm, you okay? He didn't answer right away. I just keep thinking, he said finally, that all my mother wanted was to see flowers. And they made her fight for a seat she'd already earned. He exhaled slowly. They'll learn. Denise. Not because I'm angry, but because she deserves better. When she left. Malcolm sat down, staring at his hands. They were steady again. Calm. The same calm that had made him a successful leader, not the absence of anger, but the control of it. His phone buzzed once more. It was his mother again. He answered softly. Ma, I hope you didn't do anything foolish, Elaine said gently. He smiled faintly. I did exactly what you taught me. I stood up without shouting. You didn't have to do all this, she said. Yes, I did. There was a pause, the kind that carried love and worry in equal measure. Come home, baby, she said finally. Come home and have dinner. We'll talk then. He chuckled softly. You'll always find a way to make me stop fighting, won't you? That's what mothers do. When the call ended, Malcolm leaned back, closing his eyes. Outside, the skyline gleamed a city built on ambition and contradiction, where power meant everything and empathy meant more. He didn't know what would happen next. But he knew one thing for certain: the world was about to learn his mother's name. The cabin was silent, except for the low hiss of the air vents. Passengers whispered behind raised hands, unsure what had just happened or why the flight was suddenly delayed. The flight attendants avoided one another's eyes. And at the front of the aircraft, Captain Reynolds stood still, one hand resting on the bulkhead, the other gripping his cap. He had just received the call that would haunt him for a long time. He was a man who believed in order, in doing things by the book. 30 years of flying had taught him discipline, protocol, and the quiet pride of command. But now, as he stared at the blinking red light on his intercom, the words from the control tower repeated in his mind. Captain, there's a directive from Aurora Corporate. Passenger in seat 1A misses. Elaine Porter is to remain seated. Immediate executive-level escalation. Proceed with caution. He exhaled, steadying his voice before turning to his first officer. Take the controls for a few minutes. I'll handle this personally. When he opened the cockpit door, the cabin lights seemed harsher, brighter than before. All eyes followed him as he walked down the aisle toward seat 1A. He had faced emergencies mid-air, turbulent storms, even an engine failure once. But this was different. This was shame, disguised as professionalism. Mrs. Porter, he said quietly when he reached her row. Elaine looked up. Her face was calm, unflinching, the same composure he wished he'd learned decades ago. Captain. He hesitated, trying to find words that didn't sound rehearsed. Ma'am, I want to offer my personal apology. What happened to you should never have happened on my aircraft. Elaine studied him for a moment. You weren't the one who asked me to move. No, he admitted, voice rough. But I'm responsible for the people who did. Cassandra stood a few feet away, frozen in place, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her face had lost its earlier confidence. The blush on her cheeks was gone, replaced by a cold, ashen dread. Captain, she began. Not now, he said sharply. Not with anger, but with finality. He turned back to Elaine. We've received direct communication from corporate leadership and from, well, someone higher. You have my assurance this matter is being handled." Elaine gave a faint, weary smile. Handled is a careful word, Captain. It can mean fixed, or it can mean buried. Her tone was soft, not accusatory, but it cut through the cabin like wind through broken glass. He swallowed hard. "You're right. I'll make sure it's fixed." Behind them, Victoria Langford sat rigid in her new seat. Her face was red with humiliation. She'd already sent 3 angry texts to her assistant, demanding her lawyer handle this nonsense. The irony was lost on her. Cassandra took a step forward, desperate to regain control. "Captain, the delay is causing enough," he said, his voice low but resonant. "We've done enough damage." Passengers murmured softly. One man whispered to another, "She's the CEO's mother." Another replied, "Of course she is. That's why the captain's shaking." Elaine sat quietly, ignoring the ripple of whispers. She didn't care about titles or money. She cared about respect. That was all. She met the captain's gaze. "Apology accepted," she said at last, "but I won't be flying today." A hush fell over the room again. The captain blinked. "I don't understand." Elaine stood slowly, smoothing her coat. "This seat may be mine, but peace isn't. I'll take that with me off this plane." "Mrs. Porter, please," he began, but she raised a hand, gentle yet commanding. "No need to persuade me, Captain. I've been asked to move enough times in my life. Today, I'll move by choice." The words struck deeper than any reprimand. He lowered his head. "I'm deeply sorry, ma'am." "I know," she said simply. As she stepped into the aisle, Cassandra instinctively moved aside. Elaine's gaze lingered on her for a moment, not angry, not vengeful, but piercing in its quiet truth. "You'll remember this one day," Elaine said softly, "and I hope you remember how it felt to be watched by everyone while someone smaller stood taller." Cassandra couldn't answer. Her throat tightened. Elaine turned toward the exit. The captain followed, head bowed. The purser, Ethan Brooks, trailed behind them, face pale with regret. He had said nothing earlier when he should have spoken, and that silence now screamed louder than words. At the cabin door, Elaine paused, looking out at the waiting jet bridge. The artificial light spilled across her face, glinting off the silver cross at her neck. "Captain," she said softly. "Yes, ma'am. Take care of your crew, but take care of your conscience first." Then she walked off the plane, her steps measured, her back straight. No one clapped. No one spoke. The door closed behind her, leaving a silence so deep that even the engines seemed to hold their breath. In the terminal, Paula Guillen waited nervously near the gate, twisting her badge strap. When she saw Elaine emerge, she straightened immediately. "Mrs. Porter," she began, voice trembling, "I just wanted to say, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Elaine smiled gently. "Intentions matter less than actions. Dear, but you're young. Learn from this." Paula's eyes welled up. "I will." Elaine touched her arm lightly. "Good. The world doesn't need more guilt. It needs better choices." As she walked away, the hallway seemed endless, the hum of airport life surrounding her like white noise. She could hear distant boarding calls, laughter, the rolling of suitcase wheels, all ordinary sounds, yet each one felt sharper now, clearer, as if the world itself had changed tone. She didn't look back at the plane. She didn't need to. Some moments don't require witnesses to matter. Back on board, Captain Reynolds re-entered the cockpit, face drawn. He sank into his seat, staring out at the runway lights. His first officer looked over. "Everything all right, sir?" "No," the captain said quietly. "Not even close." He sat in silence for a long time, then reached for the intercom. "Crew, secure the cabin. We'll be grounded for inspection and review." When he hung up, he saw Cassandra still standing near the galley, eyes glassy. Ethan was beside her, muttering something to himself. "Cassandra," the captain said. She flinched. "Yes. Sir, I'm filing a report. Full disclosure. I'll be including your actions in it." Tears welled in her eyes. "Sir, I was just following." "You followed nothing but bias," he said gently, "and that's the worst kind of order." She covered her face, trembling. Ethan reached to steady her, but she pulled away. The captain looked at both of them, then out at the darkened sky. "I've flown men into war zones," he said quietly. "I thought I'd seen courage. But that woman, she had more than all of us combined." Ethan swallowed hard. "What do we do now?" "Now," the captain said, "we face the consequences." He picked up the phone to call the control tower. "Flight 452 requesting delay status update," he said flatly. "Passenger issue escalated. Awaiting corporate instruction." The voice on the other end was tense. "Copy that. Captain, for your awareness, the incident's gone viral." He closed his eyes. Of course it had. The world would soon know the name Elaine Porter, and for every wrong done to her, there would be a reckoning far beyond his command. Meanwhile, in the executive suite of Aurora Airlines, alarms were going off, not literal ones, but the kind that triggered in boardrooms and inboxes. A flood of emails, notifications, urgent calls, executives pacing, PR teams panicking. "Who authorized this?" someone shouted. "Do you realize who her son is?" They did now. Every employee in that chain of command suddenly remembered that Arcturus systems powered their data systems, their logistics, their global scheduling algorithms. And that one decision, made by one prejudiced attendant, had just jeopardized a partnership worth millions. "Get Thomas Greer on the line," the vice president barked. "Now." But Greer was already on the phone with Malcolm Porter. The captain's apology, Elaine's quiet strength, and Malcolm's strategic fury were converging into something much bigger than one flight delay. It was becoming a moment, a movement, and everyone, from the pilot's chair to the boardroom, could feel it coming. The skyline of New York had turned from silver to deep amber by the time Malcolm Porter left his office for the night. He hadn't eaten. He hadn't stopped moving. Every phone in Arcturus systems seemed to be ringing, and every screen flashed the same phrase across the networks: Aurora Airlines faces backlash over racial discrimination allegations. The headlines multiplied by the hour, each one sharper than the last. The video from the flight, his mother's calm defiance, Cassandra's clipped tone, Victoria's arrogance had spread like wildfire. By the time he reached the elevator, it had crossed continents. People were quoting Elaine's words. "I'm not confused. Peace isn't mine to borrow." Those sentences had become more than lines from an argument. They had become a mirror held up to a nation's conscience. Denise Hartman walked beside him, phone in hand, voice low but urgent. CNN, NBC, Reuters, everyone's calling. Aurora's stock dropped 9 points in 2 hours. Their PR teams collapsing under pressure. Malcolm didn't slow his stride. Let it drop. They built it on borrowed integrity. Denise frowned. "Thomas Greer wants to speak directly. He's been calling every 15 minutes. He'll wait." She hesitated. "Malcolm, he's desperate. He's requesting a personal meeting. Tonight." The elevator chimed. Malcolm stepped inside, his reflection doubling in the mirrored walls. "Then tonight it is. At exactly 8:00 p.m., he arrived at Aurora's headquarters, a tower of glass and polished marble overlooking the Hudson. Reporters crowded outside, shouting questions. Flashes burst across the pavement as cameras caught the CEO of Arcturus walking into enemy territory. Inside, the lobby was unnervingly quiet. A receptionist rose, pale and nervous. "Mr. Porter, they're waiting in the executive boardroom." He nodded, following the sound of whispered conversations and hurried footsteps until he entered a long, dimly lit room where Thomas Greer, the silver-haired CEO of Aurora Airlines, stood waiting. "Malcolm," Greer said, extending a hand that trembled slightly. "Thank you for coming." Malcolm didn't take it. He simply nodded. "Let's talk." Greer gestured toward a seat. "Please, sit. I want to personally apologize for what happened." "It was an isolated mistake." "No, Malcolm interrupted calmly, sitting down. "It wasn't isolated. It was cultural. There's a difference." Greer blinked. "I understand how you must feel." "You don't," Malcolm said evenly. "You can't possibly understand what it means to watch the woman who raised you be treated like she doesn't belong, not because of her behavior, but because of her skin." Greer's mouth opened, then closed. The room felt smaller now. Malcolm leaned forward, voice low but precise. "Let me tell you what's going to happen. First, you're going to issue a public apology, not a press release written by lawyers, but a direct statement from you. Second, you'll terminate the staff involved: Cassandra Wells, Ethan Brooks, and Paula Nguyen." Greer winced. "We're already investigating." "Investigations are for uncertainty," Malcolm said. "There's none here. The evidence is on video." He continued, his tone calm but cutting. "Third, you'll initiate mandatory DEI training across your company. Not a one-day seminar, a sustained program with independent oversight. And you'll pay for it out of your own corporate funds, not taxpayer deductions." Greer ran a hand through his hair. "That's substantial." "It's accountability," Malcolm replied. "The cost of doing better." Greer sighed heavily. "Malcolm, look, I agree it's unacceptable, but the media's exaggerating. Your mother's story has become symbolic, bigger than the facts." Malcolm's eyes darkened. "That's because the facts are universal." "My mother isn't a symbol." "Thomas, she's proof. Proof that even at 70, a black woman can't sit in a seat she's earned without someone doubting she deserves it." Greer didn't reply. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched until it became heavy with something unsaid respect, or perhaps fear. Finally, Greer exhaled, "All right, we'll meet your terms." Malcolm nodded once. "There's more." Greer frowned. "More. I want transparency," Malcolm said. "Full disclosure of internal complaints against your flight staff over the past 5 years. Make them public. People deserve to know the truth." "That could destroy us," Greer said quietly. "Then rebuild." Malcolm answered, "If you can't stand in the light, you don't deserve the sky." The sentence hung in the air. Greer stared at him, speechless. Malcolm stood. "You have 24 hours. After that, I'll make my own statement, and I promise it won't be as kind." He turned toward the door. "Malcolm," Greer called after him. He paused, hand on the handle. Greer's voice softened. "Do you really think one company changing its policies will make a difference?" Malcolm looked over his shoulder. "It won't start a revolution," he said quietly, "but it'll stop one woman's humiliation from being ignored. That's enough for tonight." And then he left. By the next morning, Aurora's official Twitter account released a statement. "We deeply regret the unacceptable treatment of passenger Mrs. Elaine Porter aboard Flight 452. We take full responsibility and are implementing systemic reforms effective immediately. Within hours, it was retweeted 500,000 times. Hashtags trended worldwide. Seat 1A. The Porter Principle. Flying while black. Elaine's name became a symbol, not of anger, but of composure in the face of injustice. The world admired her grace, her quiet refusal to be erased. Malcolm didn't post anything. He didn't need to. His silence became its own statement. But in the offices of Aurora, the storm was only beginning. Cassandra Wells was called in first. She walked down the hallway with trembling hands, the once perfect bun in her hair now coming undone. She sat across from HR and Thomas Greer himself, who looked years older than he had the night before. "Ms. Wells," he said quietly, "you're being placed on immediate termination. Your actions have caused irreparable damage to this company and its reputation." Tears welled in her eyes. "Sir, I didn't mean," he held up a hand. "Intent doesn't erase harm." As she left the building, flashes went off. Reporters swarmed. The world that once ignored her cruelty now refused to look away. Next came Ethan Brooks. He didn't argue. He only said, "I should have spoken up," and signed his release. Paul Nguyen was spared from termination, reassigned instead to community outreach. When she read the notice, she cried in relief and shame. She called her mother that night and promised to be better. Meanwhile, in Malcolm's apartment overlooking Central Park, the evening news played softly. Elaine sat on the couch, wearing her reading glasses, tea in hand. Malcolm sat beside her, phone buzzing with unread messages. "You made quite a mess," she said gently, without looking up. He smiled faintly. "I cleaned it too." She chuckled. "You did what you thought was right. That's what matters." He turned to her. "I just wanted them to see you the way I do." She looked at him over her glasses, eyes kind. "Baby, people don't need to see me. They need to see themselves." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She set her cup down. "When someone treats me small, it says more about their fear than my worth. But if all we do is punish them, they'll never learn. Justice without mercy becomes revenge." He leaned back, absorbing her words. "You sound like you could run the company better than I do." She smiled. "I ran you, didn't I?" He laughed softly, shaking his head. On the TV, a reporter spoke about Aurora's apology, about reforms, about the Porter Principle, a new benchmark for corporate accountability. Elaine watched quietly, her expression unreadable. Then she said, almost to herself, "Sometimes the lesson costs more than the crime." Malcolm looked at her. "Do you regret it?" She thought for a moment. "No. I just wish it hadn't taken a storm to remind people what respect looks like." Outside, the city lights flickered like constellations. Somewhere below, a bus rumbled past. Life went on, unbothered by headlines. Malcolm glanced at his phone. Thousands of messages, articles, interview requests. He ignored them all and leaned back, letting the quiet settle. For the first time in days, his heartbeat slowed. In that silence, Elaine reached over and took his hand. "You did good, son," she said softly. "Now make it count." He nodded. "I will." Across the ocean, in London, a journalist watched the story unfold on his tablet. He stared at the photo of Elaine Porter stepping off the plane, calm and unbowed, and whispered to his colleague, "This woman grounded a billion-dollar airline with grace." And in boardrooms, classrooms, and living rooms across the world, people repeated her name not in anger, but in admiration. The storm had begun in a seat labeled 1A. Now it was rewriting what dignity meant at 30,000 feet. The early morning light poured gently through the wide windows of Elaine Porter's hotel suite in London. Outside, the city hummed with quiet rhythm, taxis whispering along wet streets, distant church bells marking a new day. Elaine stood by the window, wrapped in a cream shawl, watching the pale sun rise over the Thames. For the first time since the flight, she felt air fill her lungs without the weight of humiliation pressing down on them. The room smelled of lavender and Earl Grey. On the small table near the bed, a silver tray held a breakfast untouched toast, berries, a pot of tea still steaming. Next to it sat an envelope with Arcturus's logo embossed in silver, a letter Malcolm had sent with the jet that carried her across the Atlantic. She ran her fingers along its edge before opening it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of thick paper, his handwriting steady and strong. "Ma, you always told me that calm isn't the absence of power. It's how power behaves when it's certain of itself. Yesterday, the world saw that truth. You didn't raise your voice, but you made an empire listen. I love you for that." She smiled softly, pressing the letter against her chest. "That boy," she whispered, shaking her head, "still writes like he's trying to change the world." A knock sounded at the door. When she opened it, a tall man in a gray suit greeted her with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Porter. I'm Stephen Alden, your driver. Mr. Porter asked me to escort you to the Chelsea Flower Show when you're ready." Elaine's face brightened. "The flowers," she murmured. "Finally, within the hour." She was seated in the back of a sleek black car, gliding through London's gentle drizzle. The city was a mosaic of history and renewal, much like her life full of cracks, but still blooming. She looked out the window at strangers crossing the streets, some smiling, some rushing, each carrying their own small burdens. At the entrance to the Chelsea Flower Show, the air was thick with perfume roses, lilacs, earth after rain. The garden stretched before her like painted dreams. She moved slowly among them, trailing her hand over petals beaded with dew. For a while, no one recognized her. She was just another visitor, a quiet woman admiring beauty. Then a voice behind her said softly, "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Porter?" She turned. A young black woman stood there, camera around her neck, eyes bright. "I'm sorry to bother you," the girl said. "I just wanted to say, what you did, it meant something. My mom sent me your video. She said, 'That's what grace looks like.'" Elaine smiled gently. "Sweetheart, I didn't do much." The girl shook her head. "You did enough. You made people see." They took a photo together, and as the girl walked away, Elaine felt something warm settle in her chest, the strange mixture of gratitude and sorrow that comes when pain becomes purpose. She continued walking until she found a quiet corner of the gardens, where benches sat under a canopy of wisteria. There, she sat down and let the world slow. She pulled a small notebook from her purse, one she'd carried since her nursing days, and began to write. Her handwriting was elegant, looping, the kind taught in schools decades ago. "People think strength is loud," she wrote, "but it's really patience with purpose. I didn't fight that day to win. I stood because sitting down would have meant agreeing with my own erasure." A shadow crossed the page. She looked up to see a woman standing before her, hesitating. She was around 40, neatly dressed, her face pale and tired. For a moment, Elaine didn't recognize her. Then the woman spoke, voice trembling. "Mrs. Porter." Elaine blinked. "Yes." The woman clasped her hands. "My name is Cassandra Wells." Elaine froze for a heartbeat. The world seemed to tilt slightly, then settle again. Cassandra's voice cracked. "I shouldn't be here. I just needed to say I'm sorry." Elaine studied her quietly. Cassandra's polished veneer was gone. She looked human now, fragile, remorseful. "Do you know what hurt the most?" Elaine said finally. "It wasn't that you doubted me. It was that you believed I'd simply accept it." Cassandra's eyes filled. "I was wrong. I told myself I was just doing my job. But I knew better. I've lost that job now. And maybe I deserve to. But I needed you to know. I've learned." Elaine tilted her head slightly. "What are you doing here? I'm volunteering," Cassandra said softly. "There's a charity booth over there. Community re-entry programs. Helping people start again." Elaine followed her gaze to a tent nearby, its banner fluttering in the breeze. "Bloom again, restoring lives through work." Cassandra continued, voice unsteady. "I thought maybe if I could help someone rebuild, it'd mean I wasn't beyond redemption." Elaine was silent for a long time. Then she said, "We all need a place to start again." Cassandra looked up, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Do you forgive me?" Elaine considered the question. Forgiveness, she'd learned, wasn't about erasing pain. It was about refusing to carry it forever. "I do," she said quietly. "But forgiveness isn't a finish line, dear. It's a seed. You still have to water it." Cassandra nodded, unable to speak. When she walked away, Elaine watched her for a long time. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt lighter, like the burden of being right had finally set itself down beside her and walked away. 2. She looked back at her notebook and wrote another line. Justice repairs systems. Forgiveness repairs souls. The wind turned a page. She smiled, closing the book. That evening, she sat in a quiet cafe overlooking the river. The sky glowed orange and pink, reflected in the water like fire melting into peace. A familiar voice came from behind her. "Thought I'd find you here." She turned to see Malcolm Porter, stepping in with his usual understated confidence. He wore a navy coat and carried the same tired grace she'd seen in him since he was a boy. "You flew all the way here," she said, amused. "Couldn't let you enjoy the flowers without company." He sat down, setting 2 cups of coffee on the table. "How was the show?" "Beautiful," she said. "Everything blooming, everything alive." He smiled faintly. "You deserve beautiful things." "Ma." She looked at him. "You did what you thought was right. But don't let anger turn into identity. You have too much of your father's fire." "I didn't do it out of anger," he said. "I did it out of love." "I know," she replied gently. "But even love needs boundaries. You can build justice without burning the world." He nodded, thoughtful. "You sound like my board of directors." She laughed softly. "I raised your board of directors." They sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee, watching the sun sink into the river. Then she reached into her bag and handed him the letter she'd written in her notebook. "Read it when you're alone," she said. He looked down at the small, folded paper. "What's it about grace?" she said simply. "And the cost of it?" They sat until the cafe lights came on, golden reflection shimmering on the water. Around them, London-moved lovers walking, waiters closing umbrellas, a busker singing in the distance. Elaine looked out the window one last time and whispered, "Maybe this was never about a seat. Malcolm, maybe it was about who still stands when dignity is tested." He watched her profile the soft lines of a life lived without bitterness, and felt something inside him ease. When they left the cafe, they walked slowly through the quiet streets. The air smelled of rain and roses. She looped her arm through his, and for the first time in weeks, he saw her smile reach her eyes. Behind them, the city lights shimmered like a garden in bloom. 2 months later, the skyline of New York burned with the pale gold of early autumn. Inside Arcturus Systems' glass tower, every wall screen displayed the same emblem. The Aurora Reform Summit, cameras, journalists, and executives from across the aviation and tech industries filled the auditorium, waiting for the keynote to begin. At the center of it all stood Malcolm Porter, straight-backed, calm, dressed in a dark suit with a simple silver pin at his lapel, a small flower engraved with the letter E, his mother's flower. When he stepped up to the podium, the crowd hushed. "Good morning," he began. His voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had earned every inch of the ground he stood on. 2 months ago, a flight that should have lasted 5 hours exposed a truth that's been in the air for decades, a truth about how we see dignity and who we think deserves it. He paused, scanning the audience. What happened to my mother wasn't just a mistake. It was a mirror. It showed us that technology, policy, and profit mean nothing without humanity guiding them. Behind him, a screen came alive with images, Aurora flight crews undergoing new training, smiling employees greeting passengers, data graphs showing transparency reports. Then came a final image, his mother, Elaine Porter, at the Chelsea Flower Show, touching the petals of a white rose. Malcolm turned back to the audience. That's why today, I'm proud to announce a joint initiative between Arcturus Systems and Aurora Airlines, an independent ethics platform designed to ensure fairness, dignity, and accountability across every passenger interaction. We call it the Williams Protocol. Reporters scribbled, cameras clicked. He continued, "The name honors the legacy of Dr. Robert Williams, a pioneer of human-centered aviation ethics who believed that equality is efficiency in its purest form." He smiled faintly. "But for me, it also honors every woman like my mother who chose grace over rage, and in doing so, made change inevitable." Applause began quietly, then swelled until the room trembled. From the first row, Elaine Porter watched with quiet pride. She sat with Denise Hartman beside her, both women dressed simply, radiating calm. Elaine had been hesitant to attend, but Malcolm insisted. When he finished his speech, the moderator called her to the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice said, "please welcome the woman whose courage inspired this movement, Mrs. Elaine Porter." The applause rose again, thunderous. Elaine stood, her hands trembling slightly as she made her way to the podium. The cameras focused on her face, serene, luminous, framed by silver hair. She adjusted the microphone. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'm not used to speaking to crowds. I spent most of my life listening to patients, to families, to pain. And what I learned is that listening is where healing begins." The room stilled. "I never set out to make news," she continued. "I just wanted to sit in my seat, the one I paid for, the one I was promised. But sometimes life chooses your stage for you." Laughter rippled softly through the audience. "What happened to me on that flight wasn't unique. It happens every day, in different ways, in offices, in schools, in hospitals. People being told, with words or looks, that they don't belong. But here's what I've learned. Belonging isn't something others can give you. It's something you claim when you decide to stand tall, even when the world wants you small." The applause was softer this time, more emotional. Elaine looked toward Malcolm. My son reminded me that justice isn't revenge, it's restoration. And forgiveness isn't weakness, it's power. She smiled gently. So let's start restoring, and let's keep forgiving, until we don't need stories like mine to remind us who we are. When she stepped away from the podium, the crowd stood. The sound of applause filled the room like thunder rolling over the horizon. Later that evening, as the city lights flickered on, Malcolm and Elaine stood together on the rooftop garden of Arcturus Tower. The Hudson shimmered below like liquid silver. "You were brilliant," he said quietly. Elaine chuckled. "I was terrified." He smiled. No one could tell. For a long while, they watched the city together in silence. Then Elaine said, "You named it the Williams Protocol. Why not the Porter Protocol?" Malcolm laughed softly. "Because it's not about us. It's about the system. And the system should carry every name that's ever been silenced by it." She nodded, thoughtful. "That's a good answer." He looked at her, his expression soft. "You know, Ma, people keep calling you a hero." "I'm not a hero," she said simply. "I'm just someone who didn't move. That's exactly why you are one." She smiled faintly, looking up at the stars just beginning to show through the haze. "Maybe, but heroes still have laundry to do." He laughed out loud, the tension in his shoulders finally breaking. "I'll have my assistant handle that. You'll fold your own clothes. Malcolm Porter." He saluted playfully. "Yes, ma'am." They stood there a little longer, the cool wind tugging at their coats. "Do you ever wonder," he said quietly, "if things really change, or do they just look like they have?" Elaine thought for a moment. Change is like planting a seed. You might not live to see it bloom, but you plant it anyway. He looked at her, the city's light reflected in his eyes. "You've planted more than seeds. Ma, you planted a forest." She smiled, eyes glistening. "Then promise me something. Don't just grow it for us, grow it for the ones who'll come after." He nodded slowly. "I promise." Weeks later, in airports across the world, something quietly shifted. At boarding gates, flight attendants received alerts when seating protocols seemed biased. Cameras analyzed tone and expression to flag potential mistreatment. Real-time oversight teams reviewed incidents with empathy and transparency. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And in a small training room at Aurora Airlines headquarters, Cassandra Wells stood at the front of a new class of recruits. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was now leading the very sessions that might have saved her job months earlier. "Today," she began, voice firm but warm, "you'll learn more than customer service. You'll learn to see the people in front of you." In the back row, Paul Nguyen sat quietly, taking notes. When Cassandra caught her eye, they shared a small, knowing smile, the kind that only people who've been broken and rebuilt can exchange. Cassandra clicked the remote, and a video began to play on the projector. Elaine Porter appeared on screen, seated in her garden, sunlight glinting on her face. "Dignity," she said in the video, "isn't given by corporations or laws. It's what you carry when no one's watching." The room was silent when the video ended. Cassandra looked at the faces before her, young, hopeful, nervous. "Remember that," she said softly. "Every passenger you meet is a story waiting to be treated right." Months later, at JFK Airport, a small bronze plaque was installed near Gate 12, the gate where Elaine's journey had begun. It read, "In honor of Elaine Porter, whose quiet courage redefined the meaning of first class. May every traveler be treated with dignity, regardless of color, title, or seat. Travelers stopped to take photos, to read, to smile. Some cried. Most simply stood for a moment, feeling something they couldn't quite name, maybe respect, maybe hope, and high above it all, a flight took off, cutting across the dawn sky, its wings gleaming as if the whole world had decided, for once, to move together in the same direction. That evening, in her modest home filled with books and plants, Elaine sat by the window, knitting a scarf for winter. On the coffee table lay a framed photo from the summit, her and Malcolm standing side by side, both smiling. The TV murmured softly in the background. A journalist's voice narrated, 2 months after the viral incident, Aurora Airlines reports record improvement in passenger trust. Experts are calling it the Porter effect. Elaine chuckled quietly, shaking her head. They always need to name things, she murmured. Her phone buzzed. A message from Malcolm Dinner. Tomorrow. My place. No speeches. Just you and me. She smiled and typed back, only if you're cooking. Deal, he replied. She set the phone aside, leaned back in her chair, and looked out the window at the night sky. Somewhere far above, another plane crossed silently between the stars, a silver shape moving toward dawn. She whispered to herself, fly high, but never forget who's beneath the clouds. And for the first time since that day on the plane, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The story of Elaine Porter reminds us that true strength is often quiet. She didn't shout, threaten, or retaliate. She simply refused to be diminished. Her calm became louder than anger, and her dignity became contagious. In a world that still judges before listening, her grace teaches us that standing firm doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it means not moving when others expect you to. Her son, Malcolm Porter, used power not for vengeance, but for restoration. Together, they showed that justice without compassion becomes punishment, and compassion without justice becomes surrender. The balance between the two is where real change begins. For older generations who've endured a lifetime of unspoken prejudice, this story whispers a gentle truth. It's never too late to demand respect, and never too late to forgive without forgetting. Because healing isn't just for the wounded, it's for the world watching, learning, and slowly becoming better. Thank you for spending this time with us and for walking through the journey of Elaine and Malcolm Porter. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think, feel, or remember, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter, stories of courage, dignity, and hope. Let's keep reminding the world that kindness still has power, and that every small act of respect can change someone's life. Stay inspired, and we'll see you in the next story.